The King and the President, Elvis and Nixon's Secret Meeting. December 21st, 1970, 6:30 a.m., White House Gate, Washington, D.C. The biting cold of the Capitol broke the pre-dawn silence. Security was on high alert, but confused. At the entrance, stepping out of an ordinary taxi, was a man who should not have been there. Elvis Presley. He was wearing a purple velvet cape, dark aviator glasses, and carried a bizarre gift, a Colt .45 pistol. The dilemma was palpable. The king of rock, the symbol of rebellion in excess, was at the door of power, pleading to see the most conservative president in American history, Richard Nixon. It was not a scheduled visit, but a mission of urgency. His mind was in a turmoil, a mixture of paranoia, exacerbated patriotism, and the feverish desire to be taken seriously. He needed something only the president could give. The guard, astonished, didn't know whether to call the Secretary of State or Psychiatric Emergency Services. Elvis, nervous, felt his life depended on that meeting. He leaned toward the guard, his voice low and intense. "I need to talk to the president about the future of America. I'm the only one who understands the internal enemy." The phrase, said with feverish urgency, generated absurd curiosity. What the hell was the king of rock doing at 6:30 a.m., pleading for a secret audience with President Nixon? And what did he know about the enemy that the president ignored? Forget rock and roll. Forget the Vegas hits. This is not a story about music, but about power, paranoia, and the desperate search for purpose. It is the clash of two worlds: the pop icon, the symbol of the counterculture he himself feared, and the politician, the symbol of the order he desperately wished to protect. The meeting between Elvis Presley and Richard Nixon is the most bizarre and revealing portrait of America in crisis. It is the clash between Hollywood fantasy and the coldness of politics, where both men sought a validation that the public could no longer offer. If you have ever felt the desperate need to be understood or to fight for a cause greater than your life, this journey is for you. It is a dive into the White House basement and the turbulent mind of the king. Subscribe to the channel now and hit the bell, because what happened in that Oval Office is stranger and deeper than any song Elvis ever sang.
To understand the fever of that morning, we need to return to the humble childhood in Tupelo, Mississippi. Elvis Presley was not just an artist, he was a patriot. Born into poverty, he idolized authority and service. The army was not a burden, but an honor. Unlike other stars who sought exemption, Elvis insisted on serving as an ordinary soldier. The death of his mother, Gladys, while he was in service, intensified his sense of duty and the need for order in his chaotic life. In the 60s, while the world was stirred up in protests and the counterculture exploded with drugs and psychedelic rock, Elvis saw himself as the soldier of God and America. He despised the hippie movement, drugs, and what he saw as the destruction of traditional American morality. His devotion to badges, weapons, and authority was almost childlike, a desperate quest to belong to a structure that could save him from the chaos that fame had created. In the late 60s, Elvis was trapped in the Las Vegas prison doing exhausting shows to satisfy Colonel Parker. The boredom, artistic frustration, and dependence on medication increased his paranoia. He became obsessed with conspiracy theories, spies, and the communist threat. His worldview was polarized: absolute good, America, the law, against absolute evil, drugs, hippies, communism. He obsessively read books about crime and espionage. His only real dream was to become a secret federal agent at large. He wanted the badge, the authority to fight against what he called destructive elements. He felt he had a unique insight into youth culture, knowing who used drugs and who incited disorder. Fame isolated him, but he believed that government authority would validate him, would give him a purpose greater than mere entertainment. The idea that he, the king, could be a secret spy for Nixon became his obsession. He needed to be recognized as an ally in America's cultural war.
Elvis's downfall was not just physical, the addictions deepening, but ideological. He was at war with his own image. The man who revolutionized morality with his hip swivel now hated the revolution he himself had started. He saw drugs as the great enemy, but he himself was under the spell of a lethal cocktail of prescribed medications. His life was a lie, and the only way to redeem himself, in his mind, was to become a secret hero for America. The paranoia culminated in an impulsive trip to Washington, D.C., following a fit of rage in Los Angeles. He sent a bizarre letter to the president on Las Vegas Hilton letterhead, offering his services as a federal agent. He traveled without Colonel Parker's knowledge, a rare act of rebellion. He checked into a hotel and, the next morning, with the Colt 45 gift and the letter in hand, hailed a taxi and ordered the White House. The lowest point of his paranoia was his biggest attempt at redemption, begging Nixon for a badge. The angel who made the meeting possible was not a being of light, but a cold, calculating aide, Dwight Chapin, Nixon's assistant. Elvis's letter, full of grammatical errors, reached Chapin's hands. Initially it was dismissed, but Chapin, realizing the pop potential and propaganda value of a meeting with Elvis, saw an opportunity to gain the silent support of millions of ordinary Americans, the electorate Nixon called the silent majority. The symbolic figure of the turning point was not kindness, but political calculation. Nixon, who despised pop culture and rock and roll, reluctantly agreed, provided the meeting was kept in absolute secrecy. The meeting took place in the Oval Office. Elvis entered wearing his cape and sunglasses, carrying the Colt 45. The act of kindness or revelation was the strange chemistry that developed between the king of rock and the president. Elvis, nervous, began to ramble about the communist threat, the hippies, the Beatles, who, according to him, were anti-American and encouraged hate, and the drug epidemic. He offered to go undercover at rock concerts to spy. President Nixon, a master of manipulation, listened with calculated patience. He did not see Elvis as a spy, but as a symbol of control over the youth. Elvis revealed his deepest need. He needed the badge, the symbol of authority, the validation that he was a man of the law, not just a decaying singer. Nixon, understanding the king's psychology, gave him the badge. Not a secret agent badge, but an honorary badge from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. That gesture, the handing over of the badge, was what transformed Elvis's life at that moment. He cried with joy, hugged Nixon, to the consternation of the security detail, and in his emotion ended up showing Nixon his personal collection of weapons. Nixon, in turn, got the photo that would later become the most requested in National Archives history.
The resolution was bittersweet. Elvis left the White House with what he desired most: the badge. He wore it proudly, showing it to everyone, feeling finally a secret agent in the cultural war. The badge gave him purpose, a temporary relief from his paranoia. But the most ironic positive consequence was the photo. The image of Elvis and Nixon shaking hands became an icon. Decades later, and the photo was a symbol of the political bazaar of the 70s. The meeting, which was meant to be secret, became legendary, revealing the complexity and contradiction of both men. The photo is proof that Elvis, the musical revolutionary, was a scared conservative, and that Nixon, the politician of order, was willing to use pop fame for his own ends. Elvis's life didn't truly change. The badge did not save him from his addictions, but the story became a cultural landmark, a reminder of the emptiness that power and fame leave behind. The story of the meeting is a reflective conclusion about the nature of America and its icons. The king of rock and the paranoid president, both trapped in their own images, both isolated by power. What they discussed reveals that both were fighting the same ghosts, a lack of control and the fear of disorder. Elvis, with his badge, tried to buy a purpose. Nixon, with the photo, tried to buy popularity. Both failed to find peace, but left us with a story that transcends politics and music. It is a poetic and universal moral. The search for external authority and validation will never fill the void left by a lack of self-acceptance. Elvis's real fight was not against the hippies, but against his own solitude.
Elvis's true struggle was not against the hippies, but against his own loneliness, because some stories should not be forgotten. Elvis's obsession with order and authority had deep roots in his Tupelo childhood. Poverty was disordered. The law was the only unshakable structure he knew. When Vernon, his father, was imprisoned, the figure of authority became complex. It was protective, but also punitive. Upon becoming the king, he surrounded himself with guns and honorary badges, a desperate attempt to buy the security that money wouldn't give him. His gun collections were vast, not out of hobby, but out of paranoia. He felt constantly threatened, whether by the mafia or by the destructive elements that, in his mind, wanted to destroy America and, by extension, his success. He was the Tupelo boy, now a millionaire, trying to prove he deserved the wealth, that he was more than a mere entertainer. He needed to be a man of the law, a secret agent who could justify his existence beyond the hip swivel. The year 1970 was a period of increasing paranoia. Elvis locked himself in his room at Graceland, reading volumes and volumes about criminology, drugs, and communism. He firmly believed that, having lived the underground side of the culture, he had unique insights to help the government. His mind, already altered by the cocktail of prescribed medications, which, ironically, he condemned, fixed on one idea. He needed a federal badge, a golden pass that would give him official permission to carry weapons in any state, and more importantly, would give him the purpose that was missing from his life. Music was no longer enough. Fame was a burden. The search for a badge was the search for a new identity, an identity that would free him from the Las Vegas prison. Colonel Parker, master at keeping Elvis tied to the Vegas contract, was conveniently oblivious to the king's journey to Washington. Elvis traveled impulsively in December 1970. His initial destination was Los Angeles, where he felt an impulse to buy more weapons. But in a fit of rage and paranoia, he took the plane without notifying Parker. He sent a bizarre, incoherent telegram to the president, warning about the dangers of drugs and requesting the meeting. The text was a hilarious mix of corny patriotism and desperate plea. "I will be in Washington, D.C. tomorrow," the message said, with the urgency of a national security alert, but sent by a rock star.
The internal process at the White House was chaotic. The letter arrived. The first reaction was laughter. The second was shock. The king of rock was actually at the door pleading. Dwight Chapin, Nixon's aide, was the pragmatist. He knew Nixon detested the hippie culture, but he also knew that Nixon desperately needed to connect with the common citizen, the silent majority who viewed Elvis as a patriotic hero, unlike the artists who protested against the Vietnam War. Elvis's visit would be an invaluable propaganda victory, a slap in the face to all the progressive artists in Hollywood. The meeting, scheduled for 12:45, was rushed to 6:30 a.m. to ensure maximum secrecy and avoid the press. Elvis was led into the Oval Office, wearing his purple cape, high collared shirt, and sunglasses. He looked like an alien prince. Nixon, formal and rigid, received him with the coolness of a politician fulfilling a duty. The bizarre chemistry began when Elvis bowed deeply, almost in a curtsy, and expressed his profound loyalty to America and to Nixon. The conversation was an Elvis monologue, where he rambled about the communist threat, drug use, and the Beatles.
He called the Beatles anti-American, citing the fact that they had stayed in a hotel on the same street as the Russian embassy. Elvis's paranoia was his reality. He was genuinely convinced that he was serving the country. The crucial moment of the act of revelation was when Elvis offered his Colt 45 as a gift to Nixon. The gun was extremely valuable. The president, already embarrassed, barely knew where to put the weapon. Elvis then made his request, the badge. He begged, almost crying, to become a federal agent at large. He wanted the status, the authority to travel and carry his weapons, the permission to fight the war against drugs that he believed he was losing in his own life.
Nixon, a master at giving little to receive much, saw the opportunity. He knew the badge was largely symbolic. He instructed his aide to procure the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs (BNDD) insignia. The handing over of the badge was Elvis's turning point. He hugged Nixon, cried, and felt finally validated. He was no longer just the decaying king of Las Vegas. He was a secret agent. The badge was his symbol of redemption, the attempt to save himself from his own demons by taking on the role of a hero. The gift of the Colt 45 was a bizarre act of kindness, but the badge was the kindness that the president gave him in return. The photo taken that day is the visual resolution of the story. It is the record of the collision between political power and cultural power. 50 years later, the photo is the most requested in the National Archives, surpassing images of presidents and wars. Elvis's life didn't change. The badge did not save him from his spiral of medication and paranoia. He wore it all the time, displaying it as a talisman, but the internal emptiness persisted. The final irony is that the meeting, planned to be secret, became the biggest visual story of his life. The man who wanted to be taken seriously as an agent was immortalized as a cultural joke, the clash of opposites. The reflective conclusion of the story is the meditation on the human condition of seeking purpose. The meeting of Nixon and Elvis reveals that even at the top of the social hierarchy, the human being feels lost. Both desperately sought something that power or fame could not give. Nixon sought legitimacy from the people. Elvis sought legitimacy from the law. Both were at war, Nixon against the political internal enemies, Elvis against the internal enemies of his own mind. Elvis's song was loneliness, and Nixon's politics was distrust. The badge did not save Elvis from the overdose, but the story of the meeting saves us from seeing the king only as a one-dimensional icon. He was a scared patriot, a confused revolutionary, and above all, a man desperate for a place to belong.